Welcome back to Dark Horse Auto and Diesel again. This is the fourth and final episode in the ZF6 swap series. So in the last video we just started covering the wiring right at the end of it. So in this video we're going to cover a bunch more of the different wiring stuff that needs to be done and kind of get everything buttoned up and even do a test drive. So grab another beverage. And enjoy. Now's a good time to do any soundproofing if you have any desire to. Otherwise, we can go ahead and get our carpet laid back down and get some holes cut in it. Real quick before I cut the holes, I wanted to show you guys this too. There's about a 132% chance that your carpet's going to fit like crap now if you're using your original automatic carpet. And you can see right here that it doesn't really line up where it used to, and there's just gaps in it and stuff. If you're okay with that, then more power to you. Otherwise, if you're like me, I'm gonna end up just buying some new carpet for it that's made for a manual, because this is gonna drive me nuts after a while. All right, now I've got that one installed. My parts truck did have that boot, but it was all tore up and disgusting, so I just ended up buying a new one, and part number for that as well. Now I can move on to cutting out for the shifter. That one should be significantly easier. I wanted to do this one first because it was clearly going to be the most difficult. And make sure you screw up your carpet a little bit too, like I did. Adds a nice little custom touch. Right, now we can start cutting for the transmission shifter. Already got a little bit of a hole started there. Just kind of feel around a little bit and just tap until you feel where there isn't any floor, and then just stab a hole through it. And I still have my shifter opening on the trans covered up with tape to keep from, because there's going to be a lot of dust and stuff coming off of this, and you don't want it getting down in your trans. And this is another one of those things that I ended up buying a new part for the shift boot, and there's the part number for that. You may want to do the same. I did, because just like my transfer case shift boot, this one here was disgusting and torn up, and also it was missing this white piece on the bottom. That is actually very important as far as sound reduction goes. The difference between having that white piece and not having it is a heck of a lot of extra noise in the cab. So if you're missing that white piece, or if it's torn or cracked and just looking crappy, or just buy a new one from Ford. It wasn't that much. I want to say it was like 40 or 50 bucks. I can't tell you right offhand, but it wasn't too bad. It was worth it. We'll put it that way. So you should end up with something that looks about like this. The top part of the carpet's actually really easy to cut, but this crap underneath it, the insulation stuff, is actually really difficult. So I would make sure you have plenty of sharp blades handy. So we're going to go ahead and test fit this boot, make sure everything lines up good, and then we'll pull it back off, pull our tape off of here, and we're actually going to fill the transmission at this point, because it's a lot easier to do it from up here than down below. So we'll get to that in a minute once I get this boot test fitted. Test fit successful. Now this boot here is a lot more forgiving than the one for the transfer case, because it's got all these goofy angles and stuff on it. This one, it's, you know, actually the screws, as long as you cut out past the screw holes a little bit, I mean, you've got a solid, you know, inch or so worth of free play there that if you do screw up. Whereas this one here, it's not quite as forgiving, because the part that actually goes down through the carpet is a lot closer to the edge than it is on this one. So we'll pull that off and take care of the trans now. Now, if you haven't done so already, I would go down and drain the fluid out of the transmission if there's any question on how long it's been in there. Do it right the first time. It's going to be easy now to fill it up, as you can see. Now, there's a lot of debate on what type of fluid to use. I'm not going to go too deep into that, but I will touch on it briefly here. I'm using this here, the Mobil 1 Synthetic ATF. I've heard good results with that. I've also heard good results with the Redline D4 ATF, I believe it is. There's some people out there that I've heard of them making like this weird concoctions of fluids, like 3 quarts of transmission fluid, a quart of gear oil, or 2 quarts of gear oil, another quart of some kind of transmission additive. I've also heard of people using motor oil in the mix as well. And that just sounds way too complicated. They do it to get rid of the gear rollover noise, which is just the rattling at low RPM. But like I said, the Mobile One synthetic ATF, I've heard good results from that. And the manual calls for 5.8 quarts. I don't know if that's including the cooler system or not, but I'm just going to go ahead and dump 6 quarts in, and we'll end up checking it later once I start it up and test drive it for a little bit. If it's a little bit low for the little bit I'm going to drive it, it'll be fine. And also, if it does actually overfill the system a bit, that's fine as well, because I've heard of plenty of cases of people where they'll actually overfill the transmission by a quart to try to get rid of some of the rollover noise. Supposedly good results from that as well, but we're just going to stick with 6 for now. Now we can take our little top cover for our shifter here, make sure it's cleaned up on the bottom, because we're going to put some silicone on that for a gasket. That's also a good time to make sure the boot on that is in good shape. Mine was, big surprise, destroyed. So I bought a new one. There's the part number for that. And then also there's a retaining ring that actually holds that up in there, and mine was conveniently missing. So I ordered a new one of those. So we're going to assemble that real quick, and then we'll go put this on the trans. First we'll take the retaining ring and put it inside of the boot, and then we'll slide it into the housing there. So you can see the rings in there now. So this part here is pretty difficult. You're definitely going to need some sort of lubrication. I took some clean motor oil and just went all around the inside there and lubed that up, and then went around the outside of the boot, and then you stick it down in there. I'll try to walk you through this best as I can, but obviously I'm going to need both hands. So you can see here I've got a small C-clamp. Make sure you don't pinch the boot underneath there. It's not really putting any pressure on, it's just kind of holding it in place. And then I'm going to try to take like a sock or a extension or something and just work my way around this to try to force it in. That snap ring is really stiff. And then with the C-clamp in there, obviously I've got it out now, but you know, the C-clamp was over here. Then I took a socket and went about right here and just kind of lightly tapped it in, and it just slowly worked its way around. And if you don't have it in all the way, you have to do it again because it'll pop itself back out. I had that happen. But once you've got it in there, it should stay just fine. And then we can take our other piece here, make sure you don't lose these little plastic bushings, and get that drop down in there. And then your plastic pieces are gonna look like that when you drop it down in there. If you turn them around, it's not gonna sit right. But then that'll just drop down in there, and then it'll look like this. Now we can clean up the top of the case and clean the bottom of this back off from the oil on our hands, and get a nice thin bead of silicone on there to seal it up. And this is also a good time to come in here and make sure that your vent is free. Just reach here and just make sure it spins. If it's locked up, that can cause issues too, because that means that it won't be able to vent and could cause fluid leaks in different spots. All right, now that we've got a nice thin coating of silicone, we can go ahead and put our shift tower back on. You don't want to put too much silicone on there because you don't want it squishing out on the inside and getting inside the transmission and stuff. And we'll get our bolts started. And then once we get them all started, we'll just very lightly snug them down, just pretty much hand tight. And then we'll let the silicone cure for a little bit before we finally do the final torque on it. Technically, you're supposed to wait like an hour. Don't always do that, but I've got time and other things to do, so that's what we're going to do this time. Should all be 6mm. Never mind the one that's a different color there. That's one of mine was lost. Probably buried somewhere in the parts truck somewhere, but it was easier just to get a different one, which those are M8 125 by 35 if you happen to need to buy one. So as far as the final torque goes, I don't have a torque spec on it, but you should be fine just doing lightly snug. Just keep in mind you're threading into aluminum, and you will strip it out very easily. So I just went about an eighth of a turn or so after the bolt head contacted the surface, and that's about all you need, just snug. Alright, so I've got the lower boot slid over the lower part of the shifter there, and I've also got the upper boot attached to my new shift rod, which if you need a part number for that, there it is. I had to get a new one because the one that was in my parts truck, it's kind of a trend here, was falling apart. There's rubber bushing in there, and they were just pretty much gone, and I could pull the shifter apart by hand. So I just went ahead and bought a new one. So it's going to be kind of hard to see here, but I went ahead and just reattached the white piece down here, the lower insulator thing, back to the top, because otherwise it's going to be pretty much impossible to get those screw holes all lined up and down through the floor. So we're going to go ahead and get this screwed down. And now if your shift knob is really sloppy or loose or just completely missing like mine was, you can order one. There's the part number. We'll just get it kind of eyeballed on there, and we'll get a mallet and a towel over it or a block of wood and just smack it on there. Now we can go ahead and get our center seat put back in, or console, whatever you may have, and then we'll do the passenger seat. And before we do the passenger seat, don't forget to put these little guys back in the carpet like I just about did, if you haven't lost them already. So since the automatic carpet really doesn't line up very well with where it used to, I just went ahead and poked a new hole and stuck it through. That way, mainly just so I don't lose these pieces when I get new carpet. And then, as long as you didn't lose them or break them, we can put the little cap thingies back on, if you care to, or you can just leave them off. I don't care what you do. This is also a good time to go ahead and just change out the fluid in your transfer case. Real simple. Drain plug, fill plug. Make sure your fill plug comes loose before you drain it though, because otherwise you'll drain it and then you can't get fluid back in it, then you're screwed. And don't forget about these two. I torqued them to 60 foot-pounds and then just a tiny little bit extra, because that's what the torque was for all the other cross member bolts, so I figured that'd be good. It's also a good time to go ahead and get your starter installed, and if you want, your front drive shaft as well, and also your downpipe. Alright, one of the last things we need to do here for the swap is to swap out the PCM to the one for a manual truck. And to do that, there's a 10mm bolt down here. We're looking at it. Go ahead and take that out. That's the wiring harness for the PCM. Alright, then once you've got that loosened up, the bolt won't actually come out. It's part of the connector. It just holds it into the PCM. But go ahead and just pull it out and just kind of leave it off to the side a little bit. And then we'll go inside the truck. All right, and if you have a chip installed, before you pull it, make sure your key is out of the ignition or the battery's unhooked. If you leave the key in when you pull the chip, you can fry your PCM. So then you're gonna wanna take these two screws out, that one there too, those are 7mm. And then once you've got them two screws out, you can just kind of pull on it a little bit and wiggle on it and it'll come out. Mine's being difficult today. So that was incredibly difficult with the pedal in the way. You could probably do this before the pedal. Might make more sense. What actually was causing me issues was this lip right here was getting hung up on the back side of this metal bracket right here. And I just ended up getting a pry bar in there and just gently prying on it a little bit. And after that, it kind of popped out. All right, then we just take the cover off the automatic PCM and slide it on to the manual PCM. All I did was I just took my side cuts and just cut some of that little lip off. Now hopefully it should slide up in there a lot easier. Yeah, still a minor amount of difficulty, but nothing like it was. And just tighten the bolts back up, these two screws in here, and the one out under the hood, and that part's done. All right, there's a couple other little wiring things that you're going to have to do in order to get the truck to start. So the first thing you're going to need to do, this is not a permanent solution. This was just me testing out to make sure that it's actually going to work. But what you need to do is on this plug here, there's a blue-orange wire right there. That one right there, and it needs to be jumped over to the tan red wire on the plug also. And when you're looking at the plug, let me get this without knocking my jumper out here. Those are the pins you're going to jump. I would definitely recommend finding a more permanent solution than this. You can use your factory wiring harness and just cut most of the rest of the wires off. Make sure you're not cutting ones that you need, but you can just splice them together, or come up with some other solution. But like I said, this is just for testing purposes. And then so that'll help you complete your starting circuit. And then on the inside here, you can leave this jumper thing on here and the truck will start. Just make sure you don't start it in gear, because at the moment I don't have a clutch safety switch on. Obviously the recommended way to do this would be to have your clutch safety switch, which this just plugs into once you get it on your clutch pedal rod. All right, here's another view of the what you need to do for the starting circuit. So if you're switching to a manual transfer case like I have, like I said, it's just this tan red wire here and the blue orange. This is the transmission side of the connector. If you're doing the manual transfer case like me, these two wires are all you need to jump. So you can actually, if you want to, you could just cut this whole connector off, the gray one, and then just splice these two wires together, solder them, heat shrink butt connectors, whatever. Just make sure you got a good solid connection, and the rest of it should be fine. You can just eliminate it, and then most of your other wires and stuff are going to be on your black plug. If you're sticking with the electronic shift transfer case, I'm going to go over that here in a little bit. I'm not going to go into full detail on it, but I'll just kind of touch briefly on what you need to do, and you should be able to figure it out. Another quick pause here. So keep in mind that what I'm about to tell you is information that I haven't used in, it's been over 10 years since I've done one of these swaps on a truck that used an electric shift transfer case. So kind of take this with a grain of salt. But basically, as long as I'm remembering everything correctly, that gray plug there is where most of your electronic shift wiring is going to be, and you will have to do a little bit of modification to that. And I don't remember the specific details. I do remember that I took one of the wires off of the transmission range sensor and spliced it in with one of the wires on the shift motor. Like I said, I don't remember exactly which ones it was. You might have to look up some schematics for it. If anybody needs to know, you can ask me down in the comments and I'll see if I can remember exactly what I did. But just know that basically in order to shift, the transfer case motor is looking for a number of different inputs. Higher range, all it needs is just the shift signal, the one that just tells it to shift. Now, if you're going between high and low range, not only does it need that shift signal, but it also needs a brake input and a neutral, or if you have an automatic, it'd be neutral. But with the manual, it's looking for basically that you've pushed the clutch in. It's looking for a signal for that. So it needs all three of those inputs in order to shift between high and low range. So that's where you may have to do a little bit of modification to the wiring. And hopefully, if anybody needs it, I can refigure it out and either add it to the video or just put it in the comments or something. And then also during the swap, you're going to find that your cruise control doesn't work. And I'm going to show you how to fix that as well. We're going to take this back off, and we got to do a little bit of wiring underneath there. What you're going to need to do is come up here where your automatic shifter connected into, this plug here. And there is a tan white wire. See it here on the right side of it. That tan white wire right there. You need to splice into that and run it down. Connect it here to your tan light blue wire on your clutch safety switch plug here. and then that will allow the cruise control to start working again. So what I'm going to do, you could probably find the wire up in this bundle here, but that's going to be a pain tearing that apart. So what I'm going to do is just come up top here and just splice into it with a butt connector or something. Just run a separate wire down to here, and then just, you know, another butt connector or something. I'm not a big fan of the quick splice connectors. You can use them if you want. I've used them before, but sometimes they do have a tendency to fail, so you make your own call on that one. Now, you don't have to pull your gauge cluster to do this part, but I had to replace a couple of the illumination bulbs in mine anyway, so it does make it significantly easier to do this part with the gauge cluster out. But you can see what I've got going on here. I just ended up cutting that wire off. I'm gonna cap that just in case there's any, I don't remember if there's any current flowing through that or not, but it's always a good idea to cap stuff off anyway, keep it from corroding. And then I've got that connector there, wire running back, running down through here, make sure it's not rubbing on anything metal. I've got it a little long here, but it's easier to have it that way than be too short. And then I've got it spliced into there and then down into that connector. So now that we're done with all the wiring up here in the column, now's a good time to go ahead and do that. Get your covers put back on, and also tighten your steering column back up with the 13mm bolts underneath. I don't have a torque spec on those, just pretty snug, be good. They don't have to be super tight. So now I'm going to put that shroud back on. Mine on my parts truck was a tan interior, and so that meant the shroud was tan, and that would have driven me nuts being that I have a gray and black interior. So if you need a black shroud, this is the part number for it. I'll try to remember to put that in the description as well, along with some of the other parts. Since I didn't have my steering column tightened back up yet, I went ahead and just dropped it back down again to put this top shroud on. It made it a heck of a lot easier. And then you can get this thing threaded back on. There is flats in it here for a wrench if you need to, but I just do hand tight and call it good. And then take your keys, and that's done. Now I'm actually going to tighten up my steering column, because there shouldn't be anything left now to do with that. All right, time for the first moment of truth here. See if this thing even starts up. Oh yeah. I don't like the fact the service engine soon light's on. Have to see what that's all about. I've already driven it a little bit, but I'm going to show you how everything that I did works. Not starting out in low because that's just ridiculous. Having no tunes currently is slower than hell. So, remember I mentioned about the cruise control and that funky wiring that I had to do. So there it is, it works. Foot is not on the pedal. I don't have the cruise light on the dash because, like I said, this is an early 99 PCM. You switch to the late 99 or 2000, 2001 PCMs, you will end up having the cruise light on the dash, the little green light. But I'll just live with that for now. But obviously, everything works. Pretty much perfect for the most part, besides the check engine light, but we'll revisit that and see if that ends up fixing the problem. But anyway, thanks for watching. I hope this helps somebody out that's wanting to do this swap. It is, in fact, possible. Just takes a lot of work. I spent about a little over a week working on it, but I ended up having the week off work, and yeah, there was a lot of other stuff I had to do in the process. I cleaned up a lot of the wiring underneath the dash, stuff like that wasn't really necessary for the ZF swap. So if one really wanted to, if they had all the materials ready, you could probably get this swap done in, if you worked pretty good on it, 2 to 3 days, if you hustled pretty good. But otherwise, I'd expect it to take about, a week or so if you're only working on it a couple hours a day or whatever. But overall, I'm very happy. It's pretty quiet in the truck, other than the 4-inch exhaust that I have on. That's straight piped, but there's no funky noises coming from down there or anything like that. Drives really nice, and I'm happy. So again, thanks for watching, and hopefully somebody can make use out of this video. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave them down below there, and I'll try to respond with any answers if I can answer you. Well, that concludes the ZF6 swap video series. It's currently September of 2022, and I actually did all that work and recorded all that back in May of 2021. So I've got well over a year's worth of use out of the truck since then, and I can tell you that everything has performed 100% flawlessly. I got the new PCM put in it, and really that was pretty much the only thing that caused me any issues. Was at the time of the video, I was running the early 99 PCM, but shortly after I did all that work, I bought a DAC 2, which is one of the more sought after ones. Supposedly the DAC 3 is the most sought after, but as far as when it comes to tuning and stuff goes, any of the DAC ones will work just fine. They're literally all the same once you get tunes on it. And what it really boils down to is the DPC number that's below the PCM code that most people look at. So anyway, I hope everybody appreciates this, because that was a lot of work and a lot of editing. I think I just spent most of the last 3 days editing those videos down and getting them posted up here. And as far as long-term opinions go, I'm still really happy that I did the swap. I always wanted a manual truck, even when I bought that one back in 2007, and just finally had the right opportunity to make it a manual, because obviously it was auto to begin with. But I have no regrets. I'm super happy with it. I've towed with it, taken it on some long trips, and like I said, 0 issues. Everything you see in the video is pretty much everything that I did to the truck. So I'm super happy with it. So anyway, that's all for this video series. That pretty much wraps everything up. And hopefully if anybody's looking to do this swap themselves, they can watch this video series and hopefully get it done right themselves by following my advice. And if there's anything you think that I missed, or you have any questions or comments, whatever, feel free to leave them down below, and I do my best to try to respond as soon as I can. I'm pretty busy, obviously, because it's taken me almost 1.5 years to get this uploaded. But anyway, that's all. Thanks for watching. Hopefully this helps.